Hi, welcome to a very special edition of Daily Airline News coming to you from Germany. I'm with, as you can see, my co-host Richard Godfrey. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and this is just going to be really a fireside chat, although there's no fire because it's pretty warm here, isn't it?
Yeah, 34 degrees
34
centigrade.
degrees, which is why we've got some wine. But we thought we'd just chat to you all, talk about our aviation journeys. And so, Richard, I'm going to start with you.
Well, let's start with cheers.
Cheers to
cheers
our viewers.
to the viewers too.
Cheers to the viewers. Yeah, absolutely. So, Richard, how did your journey start?
When I was 7, I was invited into the cockpit. You were allowed to do it back then.
Yes, you were.
And I spent a flight just sitting in the cockpit, and I was even allowed to fly the aircraft at one point. I can't probably say that publicly. And that was, for a 7-year-old, really exciting. When I later was at school, I joined the RAF cadets. And the reason I did that is because you could, for free, learn to fly. And you could get a pilot's license.
Yep.
And I ended up, when I was 16, with a single-engine private pilot's license and a glider license.
Wow.
So you can see I was pretty hooked from an early age.
Do you remember what the aircraft was that you flew on when you were 7?
It was, I think, a Viscount.
VEA, Viscount. Yeah. Beautiful aeroplane.
Yeah. So, Geoffrey, tell me, how did you get into aviation?
Well, my first flight was in a Douglas DC-6B, and we flew. I was 5, flew from Perth to Sydney. But my uncle John Maskell, was one of the chief engineers for Trans-Australian Airlines. Trans-Australian Airlines then became Australian Airlines, and then merged into Qantas. But he used to come across to Perth and do engine changes on aircraft. And he used to take me out to the airport at night, and I was in my dressing gown and slippers and clamber over Viscounts and DC-6Bs. That's how it kind of started. And then when I was at school, my last years at school, family took us to New Zealand. We did a tour around the South Island of New Zealand. And my dear wife knows this story. I fell in love with this girl on the bus tour. And when I got back to Perth, I wrote to Air New Zealand, and because they had flown us from Sydney to Christchurch, and asked for a photograph of their aircraft, a DC-8. And I was just going to stick it on the wall, and I had pictures of New Zealand and maps of New Zealand to remember this amazing experience. And this stunning photograph arrived of this magnificent aeroplane. And the long and the short of the story is I fell in love with the aeroplane and I forgot the girl. But more to the point, I actually fell in love with the man who designed the aeroplane, or whose company did, Donald Douglas.
Yeah.
And probably the greatest industrial aerospace genius of the last century. No question. No question whatsoever. And as it happens, right now, my wife, Christine, and I are actually writing the book about him. And the DC-3 for a couple of New Zealand guys who own the most luxurious storied DC-3 in the world. And we're involved in the project, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, so that's how it started. And then from there, after I left school, I joined the bank, but I didn't like that very much. And then I went and joined McRobinson Miller Airlines and worked for an airline for a couple of years.
Yeah, well, I left school, went to university and studied engineering, but I also joined the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers because they had an aeronautical and electronics society. And more recently with Whisper, I joined the Antenna Wireless Propagation Society of the IEEE. So there's a lot that I have learned. And when I left university, my first job was working on autopilots and automatic landing systems.
Yeah, you've mentioned that recently.
So I really got into that, and it helped having a pilot's license to understand the basics about flying, and that was a fascinating job. And so when they nowadays talk about software failures or electromagnetic interference with aircraft systems, I've been there and done that.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Yeah, well, I worked for an airline for a couple of years, and then joined a textile company and spent 20 years running a textile company. And but while I was doing that, my passion was still aviation, and I started writing for the local newspaper. And one thing and another, the momentum grew. And in the mid 90s, I secured a job with Aviation Week and Space Technology as their Southeast Asian editor. And then in 2000, I switched to Air Transport World and became their senior editor. So, yeah, it was just a progression, one thing after another. And then I met Christine in 2000 as well. And between us, we've written 18 books. I think it's 18 books now.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's just one of the things about aviation. Once it gets into your blood, it's you can't get it out.
Yeah.
It's like a drug.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And for me, the big moment was when I was working in Brazil on a project and was booked on Air France 447 from Rio to Paris with an onward connection to Frankfurt. And then I had to stay on business for another 2 weeks and rebooked on Lufthansa from Sao Paulo direct to Frankfurt. And then I heard about Air France 447 crashing in the Atlantic. I thought, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Absolutely.
So that really grabbed hold of me. And then when MH370 happened, I immediately saw the parallels and got hooked on that. So I read, all the books and all of the stories on reports on MH370. But here we are after 11 years, we still haven't found out what happened.
No. Well, we both dodged a bullet because when two colleagues and I were in the States in 1984 for the handover of the first Royal Australian Air Force F-18 fighter, we were scheduled. We went to an air show in a place called Harlingen, Texas, Confederate Air Force World War II bombers and transport planes and whatnot. And we'd booked to fly on a Catalina flying boat. But because we missed a connection with Southwest Airlines, we arrived very late and to reconfirm. So we went to our hotel and we sort of asked the question, do we get up really early and go down and hope to get on, or do we sleep in and see what happens? So we decided to sleep in and see what happens. We woke up that next morning to the news that plane had crashed, killing 6 media in the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America.
It makes you think twice, doesn't it?
It does, and I've never done a military. I get offered military flights all the time, and I've never done one since. Landing on aircraft carriers, I've done that once and never again. So yeah, it's.
After my career started for about 10 years in avionics systems, I then moved to space systems and worked for 5 years on Space Lab and the Space Shuttle. And then there wasn't any jobs going in space because Europe doesn't spend that much money on space like NASA does.
No.
And so I moved into computer systems. And back then, the people who wanted lots of computer systems were banks. So you started in a bank and then moved into textiles, and I started in avionics and moved into a bank.
No, I mean, life is full of twists and turns. You sort of one door opens, another closes, and then another one opens, another one closes. And I mean, we've had Christine and I have had so many changes in the last 25 years, haven't we? It's been a fascinating journey of just adapting to new scenarios. I mean, so much is changing so fast.
Yeah, and I moved my family around from place to place and country to country. We've lived in so many places and so many countries, and I've ended up doing over 3,500 flights in my career.
Wow.
You know, a couple of those for going on holiday, but 98% were business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I haven't done 3,500. I think the last time I counted was about 2,500. But
yeah, but you're getting there.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Yes, it's. But aviation is such an incredibly complex industry. And people criticise me. They criticise me because I call myself an expert. In fact, I don't. Media call you an expert. They say our expert so and so, our expert so and so. They like to do that, but I never do. And I keep saying to them, I'm not an expert. I'm an analyst, if you like, a consultant, if you like. And one of the things I say to people is the more I learn about this industry, the more I realise how little I know.
Yeah.
Because it's so complicated, and every discipline we've got, whether it's aerodynamics, whether it's avionics, it's engines, any element of it, computers, for instance, IT. There are so many disciplines involved in aviation, as we've been discussing with these recent crashes. There's so many elements to it. You can't be an expert in any of them.
And when you consider the Boeing 787 and the Air India crash, the number of systems on that aircraft, it's horrendous. And I have been lucky enough in my career on avionics to have built one of the first microprocessors ever on an avionic system, because back when I started, commercial microprocessors didn't exist. So we actually built one from scratch. And that is really getting down to the bits and the bytes,
It does. Yeah. 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 Fascinating.
So we're going to enjoy a nice dinner together
We
this
are.
evening.
We have a nice dinner tonight and talk all things aeroplanes, and and we're also going to spare a thought, as we often do, for those folks who lost their lives on the Air India crash,
Yeah.
lost their lives on MH370, reflect on the trauma of those crashes. And as I mentioned the other day, a friend of mine who employs one of her employees, he lost two nieces. I mentioned it the other day.
Yeah.
The two nieces had come out from London to India for their grandmother's 90th birthday, and they were returning to London, 22, 23.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible tragedy. So let's hope we get answers soon.
And the whole reason why we spend so much time analyzing is because of safety.
Yes.
And trying to make sure that such an event doesn't happen again.
Yep. Look, indeed. And also with MH370 is putting pressure on the authorities to find that airplane.
Yeah.
Ourselves, and there are many others. I mean, Victor Enanello, and you've got Mike Exner, you've got Don Thompson, you've got all sorts of people who are continually reporting on and putting pressure on
Yeah.
to get a solution. Not just ourselves, but there's lots of folks that are doing this, and that's great.
It is.
That body of work that's being done by people outside. And talking of MH 370, and we must mention Blaine Gibson, all the work that Blaine's done. I've never seen a crash report ever that has listed about 10 or 12 people who have helped the crash authorities.
Yeah.
The ATSB report.
Yeah.
Singling out all these people who have contributed in one way or another to help the search.
I was quite surprised to find my name on the list.
Yeah, I was too. I thought, what are you doing there?
but it's very kind of them to acknowledge. But even this morning, Geoffrey, I had an email from a former captain, airline captain, who had written a article which he sent me, and talking about software failures in avionics, and talking about electromagnetic glitches and how software doesn't always catch them. So every day you can learn something new from these guys who really know what they're talking about and have experience. And we've said time and again, we don't have the answers on Air India, for example. We're happy to look, turn over every stone and see what we can find, but we don't have any conclusion on what happened and why.
In fact, we talk about black swan events in the northern hemisphere, and we talk about white swan events in the southern hemisphere, because all we have is black swans where we come from. This one might be a pink swan event.
Exactly.
It's just something we never in a million years envisaged 20 different things lining up.
Yeah.
The mathematics. And I remember talking to one of the top engineers at Boeing. In fact, we met up with him at the Paris Air Show, and I won't mention his name. And he was talking to me about autonomous flight and the push for an autonomous aeroplanes. And he said to me, there's no way we can ever work the calculations out to eliminate every single scenario. We just can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing we're probably dealing with.
Yeah. So if you get one failure, you can work out the consequences.
Yeah.
If you get two failures simultaneously, you can just about calculate it.
Yeah.
By the time you get to three, it gets very difficult. And what happens if you got 10 at the same time?
Yeah.
No way you can work it out.
No. And there have been crashes in the past where there have been a series of scenarios, one thing after another, like the DC-10 crash in Paris.
Yeah.
The Turkish one we talked about.
Yeah.
A whole series of things lined up, bizarre things that lined up.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I think we might wrap it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Time for dinner.
Time for dinner. So, look, thank you for watching. We're sitting in a lovely bar area in a gorgeous hotel, Ritter. And you may hear some background noise because that's everybody's relaxing after a long day out. I hope that doesn't interfere too much with the presentation. But we'll be back tomorrow.
Indeed.
And looking at your questions, of which there are literally hundreds and hundreds on the Air India crash.
We had 300 overnight.
I know, and it's fantastic. And we also, Richard, we really do, as we've discussed, so appreciate the positive feedback for what we're trying to do. It's fantastic, isn't it?
It is. It's lovely.
Yeah. And finally, a cheerio to our dear friend Blaine Gibson. We'll chat to you this week. Take care.